Alright, so today we're going to go over the lymphatic system, and here are some major components. Lymph is fluid that has been leaked out of the capillaries and interstitial fluid inside of a lymphatic vessel. Lymphocytes are T helper cells. They help the immune system. Suppressor T cells suppress the immune system. Cytotoxic T cells kill other body cells. B cells produce antibodies, and NK cells are natural-born killer cells. Lymphatic vessels, they have lymph fluid. They form a collection system to bring lymph fluid back into the bloodstream. Then there's lymphatic tissue, which include lymphatic nodules, Peyer's patches, tonsils, and gut-associated lymphatic tissue. They're like an outpost, kind of like a security system. And then you have lymphatic organs, which are lymph nodes, thymus, and spleen. They form major components of the immune system.
Now we're moving on to lymphatic vessels. Distribution and structure of lymphatic vessels include lymph capillaries, also known as terminal lymphatics, which is a dead end and a one-way valve found in most areas of the body except bones and teeth. Some features are mini valves, which are flaps in the walls of the capillaries, which let fluid in the lymph vessels but not back out. Lacteals, which are special lymph vessels in the villi of the small intestine. Their function is to help absorb dietary fats. And also lymph, which is called chyli, which is a milky white filled with fatty juice. Moving on to lymphatic collecting vessels. Features of lymphatic collecting vessels are valves, which prevent backflow, anastomosis, which is an interaction between lymph vessels. Their location is most vessels follow alongside veins. Moving on to lymphatic trunks, which are collecting vessels that come together to form trunks. Big lymph vessel trunks bring lymph to ducts. Next is ducts. There are two lymphatic ducts. One is the right lymphatic duct, which drains the right upper part of your body, right side of your head, right arm, and thoracic region of right side of your chest. And it empties into the right side of the venous system. The other duct is called the thoracic duct, which is the bigger of the two ducts, and also known as the left lymphatic duct. It drains your entire body below your diaphragm and left side of head, left arm, and left thoracic region above the diaphragm. It empties into the left side of the venous system. The thoracic duct also has the cisterna chyli, which is a big vessel for chyli. It collects lymph from both legs and from digestive system. Next, we have how lymph is transported. 3 mechanisms for pumping lymph toward the heart are valves, muscular pump, and the respiratory system.
Alright, so we're moving on to lymphoid cells. There's different types of cells. So lymphocytes are produced in red bone marrow, then mature into T cells, B cells, and NK cells, just depending on where they go. T cells are cell-mediated immunity going to the thymus. Helper T cells supply the stimulus to begin an immune response. Suppressor T cells slow down or stop an immune system response. Cytotoxic T cells target and destroy body cells that have been infected by a virus or have become cancerous. They also need T helper cell permission to do that. B cells divide and become plasma cells. Plasma cells make antibodies and also form memory cells. They need help from helper T cells because they can't do it by themselves. NK cells are the natural killer cells. They do not need permission from the helper T cells. They also kill cells infected by viruses and cells that have been infected with cancer. They punch holes in the infected cell. And we're moving on to macrophages. Macrophages are big eaters at chronic infections. Dendritic cells are a type of macrophage, spiky and spiny looking. They're big eaters, eat stuff also found in the lymphatic tissue. Reticular cells make reticular fibers, which make up the extracellular matrix. They act like bleachers in a stadium and give a place for the immune system cells to hang out and watch for invaders. And we're moving on to the immune response. We have cellular immunity and humoral immunity. Cellular immunity is caused by direct contact with some type of T cells. They actually have to touch the cell to do anything to it. And humoral immunity caused by production of antibodies from B cells. They don't need direct contact to kill the cell. And then we move on to C for lymphopoiesis, which is making lymphocytes. In bone marrow, thymus, and peripheral lymphatic tissues involved in the process. The hemocytoblasts in bone marrow start out as basic stem cells, will become immature cytoblasts in the body and travel to different parts of the body to grow up. Where they grow up affects what they do. In the thymus, they produce thymosin hormone, which stimulates T cell differentiation. They become T cells. They move to the spleen, bone marrow, and peripheral tissues. T cells have to contact whatever they are going to kill. And within the bone marrow, B cells hang around. Mature B cells go to lymph nodes, spleen, and other tissues. NK cells move to peripheral tissues.
All right, now we're going to move on to lymphoid tissues. Some functions are they house lymphocytes and provide site for immune surveillance. The structures are reticular connective tissue that is stringy and it has lots of collagen fibers in it. Those act as bleacher seats. They're a place for white blood cells to hang out. And there are different types of lymphoid tissues. We have diffuse lymphatic tissue. Those are scattered throughout the body. They're tiny patches of lymphoid tissues. They act as outposts. Then there's lymphatic follicles. Those are also known as nodules. They are little lumps in the lymphoid tissue and they are very unorganized. Germinal centers are part of that. They are where B cells are dividing and becoming plasma cells, and they produce antibodies there as well. Tonsils, they form a ring of lymphoid tissue around your throat. You have pharyngeal tonsil, that is furthest, found in the back of your throat. There are two palatine tonsils. They are the flaps on the side of the back of your throat. And then there are two lingual tonsils on the back side of tongue. And then tubule tonsils, which are rings of lymphoid tissue around the eustachian tube. Some functions of tonsils, they remove pathogens from air and food, and they help keep immune system stimulated. Some structures are, they have nodules, which are containing the germinal centers, and they also have crypts. These are cracks in the tonsils and places where bugs and viruses can get trapped in. Moving on, there are mucosa-associated lymphatic tissue, which equals gut-associated lymphatic tissue. These make up lymphoid nodules. Some location of those are Peyer's patches. Those are in the small intestine. There's the appendix, which hangs off of the large intestine on the right side, and in bronchi, which carry air to our lungs. Functions for this is it traps pathogens, just like tonsils, but they have no crypts.
Next, we're going to talk about the lymphoid organs, also known as the big critters. Lymph nodes are bags of nodules. Their functions are filtering lymph fluid and removes bacteria and debris. They participate in the immune system activation. Next, we're moving on to the structures of the lymph nodes. They have capsules with trabeculae, which are capsules on the outside of the lymph node, whereas trabeculae is on the inside, divided up like cubicles. The stroma is the framework of reticular fibers. There are cortexes. We have an inner cortex and an outer cortex. The outer cortex is where you find germinal centers and B cells. The inner cortex houses T cells. Next, we have the medulla, which contain medullary cords that make their way into the medulla, made of some material in the cortex. Here you find B cells and T cells, and they're interacting with each other. Medullary sinuses house macrophages. They have no tissue, and they're filled with fluid. Moving on to the circulation of the lymph nodes, we have two different types, afferent and efferent. Afferent lymphatic vessels carry fluid into the lymph node. There are many of these. Efferent lymphatic vessels carry fluid out of the lymph node. There's less of these. The locations are clusters along the lymph vessels, also known as inguinal, axillary, and cervical regions. Clinical aspects are buboes, which are swollen inflected lymph nodes, which are big blood-filled lymphs of lymphoid tissue, and then they turn black and die. There also are 2 sites of cancer cells from metastasis, which is when cancer spreads.
Continuing on from the lymphoid organs, in the thymus gland, so the location is the lower portion of the neck, deep to the sternum. The structures are the lobes. The lobed organ is very active in children and degenerates into fatty tissues as you get older. Functions would be site for T cell maturation, where T cells go to become immunocompetent and caused by the thymosin hormone. And then we're going to move on to the spleen, which is the largest lymphoid organ. The location is the left side of the body underneath the diaphragm. Functions would be site for lymphocyte proliferation, cleans blood, removes bacteria and old red blood cells, stores iron from making hemoglobin, makes red blood cells in the fetus, stores platelets, and acts like a blood reservoir. So the structure would be capsule with trabeculae. The capsule is on the outside, and trabeculae divide up inside into compartments. The hilus, also known as the hilum, is the indentation where the blood vessels go in and out. White pulp is where white blood cells are responsible for immune surveillance. And red pulp is everything else. There's lots of macrophages where you're recycling the red blood cells. The circulation is the splenic artery feeds the spleen, and the splenic vein drains the spleen. And then clinical aspects is the splenectomy, which is the removal of the spleen, which you can live without. It's not critical.